it causes crops to fail. Grazing land to dry up. Forests to catch fire. Drinking water to run short. And entire empires to fall. This is drought. Droughts have changed the course of human history. More than 75,000 years ago, a series of mega-droughts may have been responsible for the first migrations of early humans out of Africa. In the Bible, drought was thought to be responsible for driving the Israelites into Egypt. In the last century, drought caused a dust bowl across the Great Plains of the United States, sending 2 million people off their land. In China, the drought of 1928 claimed somewhere between 3 and 10 million lives.
Today, throughout the world, you have extremely high areas of tension related to water. And we can see very clearly that the fact water is listed on the stock market is a real question that alarms us. Will this help us to understand water importance and protect it? Or is it going to become a tension again because there's a monetary dimension behind it? The future will tell us.
In this century, droughts have a role in reshaping the world by limiting access to fundamental resources, forcing populations in Africa, the Middle East, and Central America to migrate to find sustenance.
What we're looking at is dramatic. It's in nobody's interest to have the entire system collapse, and it could definitely happen, and it is absolutely a looming disaster, and it's just a matter of how we're going to get ourselves out of it.
If we don't take into consideration all the problems that are generated around drought, we have to imagine that it's us directly who will pay for all that we've generated. So whether you're a big industrialist, a farmer, or an ordinary individual, at a given moment, we're all citizens, and we will all be confronted with this problem.
How dangerous are droughts? And what, if anything, can we do to stop them? On America's west coast, the state of California is no stranger to the scourge of a drought.
The first time I became aware of drought in California, when I was governor the first time, 1977. And that was a serious drought that affected the state north and south. So that was really the first time I thought about it.
State and federal water agencies started to plan for the worst. Another dry year. On March 4th, 1977, Governor Brown, by executive order, established a drought emergency task force.
But nothing quite prepared Jerry Brown for what was to come 34 years later. He would face drought again as the re-elected governor of California. Only this time, it would be the most intense, dry period in the state's history, one that would stretch on for 6 whole years. In 2011, the seeds for this historic drought are sown hundreds of miles away in the cooling waters of the Pacific Ocean near the equator. It's called La Niña, a weather pattern that tends to shift the jet stream, the meandering westerly air current encircling the globe. This shift leads to colder weather in the north and warmer and drier weather in the western United States.
So when you have a La Niña year, it tends to mean dry winters, but it doesn't give you much like granular predictiveness. So we know it'll probably be dry this year, but that doesn't tell us how dry, or it doesn't suggest that it won't rain at all.
The La Niña for 2011 is among the strongest ever recorded. The jet stream shifts and a stubborn ridge of high atmospheric pressure moves over California. Storms are pushed to the north. The Great California Drought has begun. Over in Europe, the effects of drought were already being felt in France, where the rainfall was dramatically below average for the year. According to Météo France, the French government weather agency, the country had not experienced this severe a drought in 50 years, but the warning signs were there.
You would be walking in July or August in the forest, and there was a carpet of leaves already on the ground, the carpet of dry leaves that you usually see in the autumn. It's an advanced phenomenon, with sap that doesn't reach the leaf, and then the leaf slowly dries out.
It may take weeks or months to perceive that a drought has even started, or when it's over.
We have, other weather phenomena that are hazardous to humans, like tornadoes, where they're difficult to predict in the moment, but you can see the weather system forming, you have some sense that it's going to happen. So drought isn't like that.
The immediate effects of a drought may be difficult to identify at first.
A drought is essentially insufficient water to meet needs. It doesn't tell you whose needs, or it doesn't tell you what insufficient means. The problem with defining drought is that it depends. So it depends on who you are, what you care about. It depends on the scale, the time scale. So is it a shortage of a couple of months a season, or is it multiple years of drought? Obviously that changes who cares and how they're impacted.
There are three types of drought. The first type is a drought which is called meteorological or atmospheric drought. That is to say that we'll have an extremely important rainfall deficit. So the deficit will come from the sky. The second type of drought is really a type of drought that we call agricultural, and is a drought that will only affect the soil. And finally, the third type of drought that we find is what we call hydrological drought, which is a drought that will affect either the rivers or the water tables.
A water table is going to be filled by rain and by watercourses. A water table that is very deep can be recharged in thousands of years. In France, considering that 50% of groundwater is used for drinking water, 25% for agriculture, and about 25% for industry, completely emptying a water table will limit us in the use of groundwater, knowing that the absolute priority is drinking water. Human activity has a strong impact on water tables. Here, we are in the inner suburbs of Paris. So there is an enormous amount of human activity.
In France, a measurement to assess the probability of future drought is the water table. Drilling down into an aquifer to measure groundwater is the responsibility of the Bureau of Geological and Mining Research.
There is a piezometric probe. When the probe comes into contact with water, current can pass through two small electrodes and it beeps. When it beeps, I'll look at how deep we are so I have the depth of water.
The goal is to provide a forecast on drought based on the state of the water reserves in France, and to make wiser decisions over its use.
If the water table is at a critical level, it allows me to trigger measures in relation to uses, be they uses for drinking water, for watering, for irrigation, and of course for industry.
In the summer of 2011, more than 68% of the country's underground water reserves were well below average. The situation led authorities to restrict the use of water, including irrigation for agriculture.
There is a major health risk if there's no more drinking water supply at a satisfactory level. In France, in some towns, we're now bringing tankers, but we're not in a situation where it's a major health issue yet.
The rains eventually return, ending the historical drought. A water crisis in France is averted until the next time.
We tend to forget about it from the autumn onwards. As soon as we go into a situation with more or less normal rainfall, we tend to forget what we've experienced.
But for California, normal rainfall is still nowhere in the forecast. 2 winters have since passed with well below averages. New Year's Eve in Los Angeles ends 2013 as the driest ever on record.
As governor, each year, we get weather reports, and some are more rainy, some are hotter, whatever. But right there, 2012, 2013, we started to notice drought conditions.
Among the state's biggest concerns, will there be enough drinking water for California's 38 million residents in the near future? Because the air is warmer, the snowpack, a vital resource for water, is shrinking. High in the Sierra Mountains, the snowpack melts during the hot summer months. It refills California's reservoirs, providing much of the state's water supply.
They tell me Shasta Dam is nowhere near at the level we're going to need. Not at capacity, and not even half full. And other dams, we're told. So we get the reports. The snow is not there. The dams aren't filling up. The rivers are down.
Measuring the snowpack's water content is crucial in planning for drought. Yet much of the snowpack is remote and out of reach by surveyors. To better gauge the amount of water that will flow, NASA, the United States government's Aeronautics and Space Agency, created the Airborne Snow Observatory. Flying 20,000 feet over the Sierra Mountain Range, researchers use airborne lasers and radar to measure the snowpack on a scale and elevation impossible to reach by foot.
Understanding the snowpack is really, really important. How fast does it melt? Where does it melt? How is it accumulated? And until this project, we really have not had spatially complete information. We've had very patchy information. We can add up how much water there is in the mountain snowpack in the entire basin.
Today, scientists can calculate water content to within 5%. Researchers believe the technology could someday be used to examine changing snowpacks worldwide and to measure the effects of global warming. In 2014, the Sierra snowpack measured just 32% of average for this time of year, one of the lowest measurements on record.
The forecast doesn't look that great for January, so I would say I became aware, like we always become aware, as the winter is upon us, where the hell's the rain? And in that 2012, 2013, 2014, it got serious, and we knew very well we were in for it. It's important to awaken all Californians to the serious matter of drought and the lack of rain. We are in an unprecedented, very serious situation, and people should pause and reflect on how dependent we are on the rain, on nature, and one another. And I'm calling for a collaborative effort to restrain our water use. Today, I'm declaring a drought emergency in the state of California.
For Governor Brown and the state of California, the crisis is just beginning. In 2014, facing the driest year ever recorded in the history of California, Governor Jerry Brown declared a state of emergency. The order allows him to call up the National Guard to deliver water. He asks communities to voluntarily reduce water use by 20%.
The people who use most of the water are the farmers. Okay, they're using 80% at least. And if the governor has to tell them, you're not going to get that water, then they really lose. That becomes a crisis. So it became, as we make the choices, to ask the urban people to conserve. If they conserved enough, then we could keep our agricultural economy strong.
Water agencies begin public awareness campaigns to get Californians to change their habits.
Sometimes it seems she's all alone in this drought. Of how serious things are. We can't waste another minute wasting water. It's time to conserve even more.
Does everybody pull together? No. In the effort to get people to conserve, when it was voluntary, which it was for the first couple of years, there was some conservation, but not enough.
Drought doesn't quite get the respect it deserves because its impact evolves slowly. Most of us are unaware when we are in one.
You may not even realize you're living in a place that has drought conditions. People who live in cities may not actually experience drought directly. Contrast that with somebody who lives in a place or has a livelihood or lives in a place that's directly dependent on precipitation.
You know, right here, where I am now on my ranch, this is where my grandmother was born and grew up, so we have a lot of history here. I know that we've only had 2 inches of rain because it doesn't come very often, and a few years ago we had massive rains. So it's something that I experience. I can see. But when you're in the governor's office and you're in the normal urban environment, it's not so noticeable. We are in a somewhat plastic and mechanical bubble where the conveniences of modern society are made available. But we put our periscope up and we get the data, and the data look really bad.
The crisis draws national attention. Bringing relief from the federal government, President Barack Obama visits the state and the Central Valley. It is here where over 1/3 of the nation's fruits and vegetables are grown.
As anybody in this state could tell you, California is living through some of its driest years in a century. California is our biggest economy. California is our biggest agricultural producer. So what happens here matters to every working American, right down to the cost of food that you put on your table.
The president came to provide money and provide help and to listen. He listened to the farmers, some of the farmers who were most at risk and were hurting.
The impact of drought on agriculture has consequences for both biological and economic survival.
In some places around the world, you know, a drought is literally a threat against food security and water security. You don't have enough food, you don't have enough water because it didn't rain.
Droughts have always been responsible for major conflicts, wars and famines. When you go back in history, most of the great wars and revolutions and revolts were generally linked to periods of famine, which were linked to series of droughts. Indeed, when we look at the French Revolution, one of the indicators that tipped the system over is the price of bread. So we can see that there's an immediate and direct link between these popular revolts and this climatic impact that will affect the harvests of our territories.
One of the worst droughts of the last 300 years was the Dust Bowl. At its peak in 1934, the extreme drought covered 75% of the United States. It lasted nearly a dozen years amid the Great Depression. Millions resettled to the western United States. Today, drought continues to force mass migrations from Central America, Africa, and the Middle East. But now, scientists are researching ways to reduce the destructive social impact of the changing climate that is already evident around the world. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, funded a project designed to more accurately monitor and plan for drought across the 2,500 square mile Hopi Reservation. Since 500 BC, the Hopi Nation has lived in northern Arizona, an area of the American Southwest known as Four Corners.
The Four Corners of the U.S. Southwest is a magical landscape. So it's Four Corners because there's 4 states that come together: Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. It doesn't get a lot of rain, so there's a lot of exposed rock. It's just a stunning landscape. It's iconic. It's where the Grand Canyon is. So the Hopi agricultural and cultural systems more broadly are actually really well adapted to dry conditions because they've essentially always lived in a dry place. And they have very, very elaborate strategies for growing corn in a dry place without irrigating.
We used to get our water over here just to drink. I mean, it was so good. Once you had a taste of it, you couldn't stop. You wanted more. One of the things that really connects us is the water. It gives us hope. It gives us inspiration. But now everything's drying up.
As the climate changes, with more severe drought conditions, the traditional Hopi way of life is under threat.
One of the many challenges with confronting drought, essentially, in the Four Corners is that it's a very large landscape, but there's only effectively a small handful of weather stations that report on the conditions on the ground in that place. The people charged with that task of putting out stations, maintaining them, and making sure the data comes in and is of high quality have never really quite figured out how to work with indigenous communities. So they essentially don't have access to the data that they need to understand how their landscapes are being impacted by drought.
A team from the Hopi tribe and the University of Arizona conducted research across hundreds of miles of reservation land, assessing range conditions, checking in with ranchers and farmers.
So we dove in and figured we could help with this question about monitoring for drought on the Hopi tribe's lands. And we did wind up helping try to figure out a way that they could do monitoring of their landscape, sort of qualitatively for drought.
The team tracked wildlife, monitored soil and wind erosion, dried up springs, declining grazing land, and failed harvests.
We really got to understand a problem in the context of a community who was wrestling with it. Many of the colleagues that we worked with really came to recognize the importance of and the challenge of, this direct engagement strategy that we have.
The project provided Hopi tribal leaders with more information on when to irrigate, close grazing lands, plant crops, or haul water. Monitoring detailed climate conditions enables more informed decision-making by farmers and water resource managers in communities around the world, vulnerable to drought. As the historic California drought continues, the state is not meeting its goal of a 20% reduction in water use. Governor Jerry Brown travels into the mountains to inspect the snowpack and is alarmed by what he sees.
I decided to go up to the Sierras near just west of Lake Tahoe, where normally they put a pole in the snow. They say, oh, we got 10 feet of snow, 15 feet. Well, this was the time, for the first time, I don't know forever, but in my living memory, there was no snow at all. So that was the new abnormal, and there it was for all to see.
This is the first year in its measurements going back to 1942 where this snow course has been bare, no snow at all.
The Sierra Snowpack's annual average water content is 28 inches. In 2015, it measures just 5% of normal.
We're in an historic drought, and that demands unprecedented action. It's for that reason that I'm issuing an executive order mandating substantial water reduction across our state. If everybody in California did the maximum in water conservation, we wouldn't need a mandatory. But because different groups, different cities, different water districts, different individuals do different things, we do have to make it mandatory. So as things got worse, we had to go to mandatory.
The governor imposes a 25% reduction to state water agencies, which supply more than 34 million Californians and nearly 1 million acres of irrigated farmland. It's unprecedented. The state of California has never seen anything like it before. Life in the Golden State is about to change. Over the years, California has developed an elaborate water infrastructure system. It's an impressive display of reservoirs and aqueducts built throughout the state to quench the thirst of its residents. Water is not only a precious resource for California's farmers, it is central to the state's identity and economy. It sustains the golf courses in the deserts of Palm Springs and lush gardens and lawns in the metropolis of Los Angeles. Lawns consume much of the water used every year in California. Brown's executive order calls for the state and local governments to replace 50 million square feet of lawns with native plants and drought-resistant ground cover.
And for hundreds of thousands of people, yes, they're putting in rock garden or drought-resistant plants. Everything we think about is oriented now to drought and what that means to our lives.
In 2015, the fourth year of drought, casualties to California's ecosystems appear.
There were a lot of impacts, but more importantly, it's on the environment. The algae that grows in the rivers and the lakes, that begins to bring diseases for the fish, for the animals, for the birds. The experts are seeing the degrading of our natural environment and habitat, and that only gets worse as these drought conditions continue.
There is one of the users of water that we must absolutely not forget, because otherwise we'll be the ones who will lead our own loss. It is the natural environment itself. If we don't leave water for this natural environment to allow it to renew itself, in fact, we're the ones who pay the direct consequences behind these effects of biodiversity loss.
Some of the first casualties are native fish populations. When streams and rivers are so low, fish cannot get to their spawning grounds. One of the most devastating environmental consequences of drought is the impact on forests.
Drought really has a direct and biological impact on the trees. When you have a completely dry spring and/or summer without water, with a heat wave, the trees no longer have the root system necessary for them to feed and hydrate themselves, and so the trees die. And this phenomenon has really become more pronounced in 4 years.
Dried out trees that die are potentially explosive, becoming fuel to spread a wildfire. In California, wildfires in 2015 consume over 900,000 acres. A recent study conducted by the United States Forest Service predicts that the number of acres susceptible to fires could double by 2050.
Just like the big fires that we've experienced in California, we can imagine that the Mediterranean area will evolve and experience bigger fires. Fires that may no longer be controllable. Even if France is recognized for its ability to manage large fires with its fire brigade reinforcements.
Firefighters in France have a new weapon against the spreading flames. Using drones in remote, inaccessible areas, firefighters are able to identify potential fires and instantly transmit exact coordinates for ground response teams.
Drone and satellite imagery is increasingly powerful and gives us immediate indicators that allow us to know whether the level of risk is high or not. The thermal imaging camera enables them to see the hot spots on a fire. When a fire is extinguished and dewatered, there are still hot spots, and there can be resumption points in the forest simply because the forest floor is rich in leaves, rich in decomposing wood.
With eyes in the sky, firefighters have an advantage in what is often a race against time. As lakes and streams are reduced, California utilities have less reliable hydropower to supply the electric grid. Power outages are not unusual.
Just picking up some last-minute water supplies because I realized the implications of the power being off. Just heard that actually tap water may be off when the power goes off. So I want to prepare. Just we don't know how many days it's going to be. So
when land lacks water, it contracts, resulting in uneven and dangerous roadways. The shift in the earth also affects the foundations of houses and buildings.
In fact, the impact of droughts on infrastructure and buildings is mainly due to a hazard known as clay shrinkage and swelling hazard. In fact, 1/5 of France is concerned by this type of hazard. As you have new rains, the soils are going to swell. These clay soils are finally going to rehydrate themselves and are going to make soils move. You'll see cracks, then you may find yourself with a door or window that no longer closes. You'll have cracked walls, and if the effect goes much further, and we alternate with more rain and more drought, then we'll end up with walls that will completely collapse.
The reduction of fresh water causes social impacts that are less obvious. Job loss, declines in community mental health, and threats to public health are due to low water levels.
So the hazard can be like the broad-scale human disaster of lack of food, famine, and lack of water. But it can also be simply, really pressuring the economics of a region. Livestock growers don't irrigate for their forage for their cattle or sheep. So if it doesn't rain, they don't really have food for their cattle, and that impacts them directly economically.
Droughts can last weeks, months, or years. The state of Arizona has been in what scientists are calling a megadrought, which can last for several decades.
So the challenge with drought, really, predicting drought, is it's a very, very complex system. And even with really sophisticated weather and climate models, it's difficult to put any kind of precision on a forecast for drought.
But clues may be found in the rings of ancient trees. Tree rings from these giant sequoias are windows into California's history, going back 1,000 years. Good years are reflected in wide growth rings, while narrow rings mark lean and dry years. Clusters of narrow rings show prolonged, devastating periods of drought. Here, carved in wood, is the evidence of the changing climate of the distant past.
We know from examination of tree rings and other observations that there were 100-year droughts in the Middle Ages in California. So we had some rain a few years ago. We may be in a longer-term drought. Maybe last 10 years, 20 years, who knows how long.
Wide rings are the record for boom times, when the environment was good and cultures flourished. Narrow rings reflect when the climate went bad. Hard times set in, along with societal conflict. In the state of Texas, new tree ring studies indicate the land experienced at least one 10-year drought every century. Tree rings in Mexico revealed the collapse of great indigenous civilizations, like the Aztec and Toltec empires. Will the rings of California's future be narrow or wide? Is the American Southwest heading into a decades-long mega drought? It is 1 year after Governor Jerry Brown called for mandatory water reduction. About 1,900 wells have gone dry in the state, leaving people in some of California's most disadvantaged communities without water. Across the state, the drought has raised food prices. Some local city officials called for drastic measures, like banning all outdoor landscape watering and ending construction permits for swimming pools. But most urban residents respond by cutting water use by nearly 24%, exceeding the state's goals. To help reduce use, thousands of homeowners claim rebates to rip out their green lawns and replace them with drought-tolerant landscaping.
The notion of every house with a green lawn, that has been challenged, and for hundreds of thousands of people, yes, they're putting in rock garden or drought-resistant plants. Everything we think about is oriented now to drought and what that means to our lives.
By 2017, a reprieve comes from the skies. The jet stream has dipped south, bringing with it rain-soaked storms for the entire West Coast. In February, California water managers returned to the Sierra Nevada snowpack to measure water levels.
Very significant increase in snow water content throughout the state, with the central and southern regions showing almost phenomenal increases in snow water content.
It is the most snow recorded since 1995. The storms brought 3/4 of the state's normal yearly precipitation in just a few weeks. On April 7, Governor Jerry Brown declares the drought over and lifts the emergency order in place since 2014. By mid-March 2019, most of California is declared totally drought-free. While Californians survived the drought, nearly 150 million trees perished from dehydration.
What comes out of this drought is certainly the experience of people working together, experiencing their membership in a community, in a neighborhood, as people of California. So we do heighten our awareness when these challenges occur. I mean, the same thing happens in a war. People do pull together and sense their identity because there's a common adversary. Well, a drought becomes a common adversary, or a forest fire, or in a more general way, climate change.
A new NASA study predicts that by the end of the 21st century, the American Southwest and Great Plains are likely to experience longer and more severe droughts than at any other time in the last 1,000 years.
So recent droughts, such as the ongoing drought in California or in the Southwest, or even historical droughts such as the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, these are naturally occurring droughts that typically last several years or sometimes almost a decade. In our projections, what we're seeing is that with climate change, many of these types of droughts will likely last for 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years.
California, for 15,000 years, never had more than 300,000 people. Now, we have 40 million, and we haven't had that many that long. And it's a lot of people, and most of them have a car, and most of them burn a lot of oil, or gas, or diesel. So we're impacting our environment. Then, because the climate is warming, and we're getting the traditional droughts that come and go, all that combines to devastate our natural environment. The world is changing, and it's changing subtly.
Warmer temperatures brought on by greenhouse gases are changing the climate. It appears some droughts no longer dissipate as quickly.
So, the impacts of climate change on groundwater resources have been modeled by scientific groups. And it is estimated that, according to these models, groundwater recharge deficits would be of the order of 10% to 20%, which will inevitably lead to a drop in groundwater levels, which will lead us to modify and adapt to our uses.
Since 2017, not a year goes by without a historic drought. So we are beginning to feel, I would like to say from our chair, hydrologists, this climate change because the weather is getting too hot. We can see very well that we have totally abnormal temperatures in France with effects that are abnormal. Any climate disruption is a disaster for an ecosystem, one way or the other. There may not be any heat wave next year, but we'll have them more often, and it's the risk that will be there. And unfortunately, it's taking place more often.
According to a United Nations Water Development Report, water use has increased six-fold over the past century and is rising about 1% a year. Poor water management tends to exacerbate the impacts of climate change, not only on water resources, but also on society as a whole.
It's very complex today to have a very clear idea of what a 2 to 4 degrees scenario will be like in our territory. It's all the more complex because these are elements and data that the population isn't familiar with. We'll have to try to regain coherence and rethink how we're going to be able to build France's resilience in the face of these extremes. And I'm sure that we can achieve this if we try, in a consensual manner, to all move in the same direction. It's our behaviour today that will have an impact tomorrow. The real problem today is our capacity to adapt and the speed with which we will succeed in adapting.
America faces tremendous challenges with the automobiles, the trucks, the trains, the factories, burning all this oil and gas and coal to get off that and to get to zero carbon emissions or a net zero. Wow, that's like climbing Mount Everest. And we got to get at it right away. So there's much to be done. There's massive political resistance.
The denial of climate change as a real problem is intentional. The reality, though, is that at this point, so many communities are experiencing the impacts of drought, climate change, that there's a limit to how, I hope, to how long people will deny what's directly in front of their faces.
Look, it's very simple. If climate is changing, then we have to change. And in order for us to change, government is going to have to play a very powerful role. Otherwise, it can't happen. Government by way of carbon taxes, government by way of regulation, by way of banning oil and gasoline cars, by making buildings more efficient, by making appliances more efficient, by all sorts of things.
But you also have a much more coherent push towards collaboration with the scientific community, trying to figure out how to do a long-range drought plan.
Drought plans not only benefit from scientific research, but also by the experience of the community. It begins by recognizing who the victims of drought are.
We have what we call, well, what I call it, transparent disaster victims. Because when you're affected by a drought, in fact, you don't immediately recognize a natural disaster. It will take several months before you're recognized as a victim. When you're flooded, you're recognized somehow. You have media that come to cover the event and consequently recognize you as a victim. Drought has victims who are in silence, who you don't see, who are nevertheless there. And this is something that we will really have to take into consideration in the coming years.
Et c'est quelque chose qu'il va vraiment falloir prendre en considération dans les prochaines années.
To be better prepared for the drought that lies ahead, decision makers in business and public service will rely on accurate climate information.
When we imagine that by 2050, we'll have a world population of around 8 to 10 billion people, we'll have to bring water to these people, sometimes in areas where there is none. And secondly, we'll have to feed them. And to be able to feed people, the food system itself needs water. Without water, we have no food. And for me, this really is the biggest crisis to come as far as water is concerned.
There are some people who say that the next war will be the water war. Well, war, perhaps not with weapons, etc., but in any case, there are wars of territory, wars of influence.
I remain optimistic because I'm aware of a number of solutions that can be implemented. Today, there are innovative solutions that allow us to put materials in the soil and capture water. We're going to have to train our populations to know that we save water when we turn off the tap, but also we save a lot of water when we change our eating habits. An average French person does not consume between 250 and 350 litres of water. He or she consumes between 5,000 and 7,000 litres of water from what he or she eats. That is to say that from his or her virtual water that we don't see, which nevertheless allows us to make our food, our clothes, and everything that makes up our daily life.
In addition to minimizing greenhouse gases, new scientific research is dedicated to improving water desalination plants, cloud seeding to make artificial rain, and recycling methods to convert wastewater into drinking water. Developing drought and heat stress-resistant crops will improve the ability of farmers to cope with increasing frequencies of temperature and the scarcity of precipitation.
We'll have to rely on either solutions based on innovation or on common sense. And indeed, agroforestry, for example, allows us to completely rethink the effects of shade, plant relationships, and the importance of planting trees.
NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System is working to develop regional drought early warning information systems across the United States. It's an effort to unify the federal drought response in the US and throughout the world. In 2020, France experienced its worst drought since 1959. By midsummer, there was only 16 millimeters of rainfall nationwide. Rivers, basins, and lakes were abnormally low. 25% of France became dry. Groundwater and river flows decreased.
In France and in Europe, for like 20 years now, 25 years, there are water management systems that have been put in place and that lead us to really make the water table level rise. It's quite under control, and it's less worrying than if there were no such measures at all. If the water table drops critically, the state has set thresholds. These thresholds will trigger measures. In general, there are 3 thresholds. A first threshold, which will rather ask private individuals to stop watering, filling swimming pools, etc. A second threshold, which concerns irrigation, for example, to try to moderate all that has to do with watering. And a third threshold, where there is such a level of alert that we stop everything so as not to completely deplete the resource. Drinking water remains the #1 priority. So, as a last resort, generally speaking, we never stop drinking water. It is necessary to set up strategies which allow to protect the underground water and to recharge it. Collecting rainwater and bringing this rainwater to infiltrate in an artificially active way to recharge targeted aquifers that have a particular use at stake elsewhere. In 2019, there were many drought decrees that were taken in many departments of central France, which led all the users of these sectors, for some, to stop their activities completely or drastically reduce their use of groundwater.
By now, most inhabitants on planet Earth are witnessing a changing climate, spawning unprecedented extreme climatic events.
Can human beings in India and China and America and Mexico and Brazil, can we respond in time? We can, and we must, we should. Science is telling us, with accumulation of data and theoretical conclusions, that we have to innovate, we have to change our ways
Planning the right response to future droughts is becoming increasingly vital.
Moi, je crois beaucoup.
I believe very much in the fact that we will have to put consciousness at all levels, put consciousness in our big companies. If they put in the right level of awareness and they're sincere in their commitment, I'm sure that we can do very beautiful things and that nature can at some point be reborn and restructure itself because it has much faster capacities than we do.
Drought tends to give us a greater awareness of our citizenship to a larger community and how truly vulnerable we really are.
What is at stake here is what I would call planetary realism. For the first time, wherever you live, you are clearly implicated in where other people live, and we're all affected together because of the climate, because of the changes, and we are tied together in the human family in a way that may be perceived by poets in the past, but increasingly will be perceived by all the people.